Welcome to the world of Dr. Night Terror. Tonight, we delve into a tale of violence, betrayal, and the unforgiving nature of fate. A man's reputation, his very life, woven with lies, shattered by a deadly game, where the stakes are nothing short of life and death. This is no ordinary tale. This is Dr. Night Terror. If you dare, like and subscribe, and enter the nightmare. Let's begin the story. I hold my reputation dear. It's a valuable thing these days. In the end, if you look to the wales of lies I have so intricately weaved, it's all a man like me has. I sat in the dark bedroom and thought in quiet, the only sound being the soft breathing of my wife besides me. I took the time to enjoy the peace as I went through the tedious work of carefully popping each bullet into the magazine, one by one. I never particularly liked guns, but in my line of work, they were a necessary evil. I had always preferred the blade. Something about the brutality of it all. I found it much more exciting than pulling a trigger. I took a moment to pull out my sharp combat knife, running my thumb along the blade. I watched as it sliced through the thin top layer of my skin, blood surfacing through the narrow incision. I looked down at my wife, sleeping beside me. She was the definition of innocence. She was very soft-spoken, her voice matching her small frame. I felt a wave of pity wash over me. She didn't know what I did, and at times I longed to tell her. But I knew it would only put her in harm's way. I tried not to dwell on it for too long. After all, I had a job to do. I'd been given a name 2 weeks ago, along with $20,000. Whatever I didn't spend on materials for the kill was my salary. I had taken out lawyers, politicians, gang leaders, you name it. I lived in New York, so there was almost never a boring target. However, this guy was an exception. His name was Ben Rogers. Even the name was boring. He had a fairly expensive apartment, but that's expected of an architect. The guy was a creature of habit, always going from either his office to a current build site or to the nearest Starbucks for lunch at 1:30 p.m. sharp. He would stay for 45 minutes exactly, then be on his way back to work, until he would leave at 7:30 on the dot. I had to utilize my gun for my last kill, so I was just itching to use my knife again. My fingers ran over the handle as I sat in my car waiting for Ben to arrive at work at 8:15 a.m. As always, he got out of his black Mercedes and looked around, eyes hovering over my car for a brief second before turning his head back to the build site and walking in. I waited, observing him throughout the day, eager for the kill that I knew would come later. He left for his lunch and came back for the rest of his workday, leaving the build site at 7:30 p.m. I began the usual task of following him back to his apartment. But this particular night, he changed his destination. The unexpected ride caught me off guard. I had to sharply jerk the car to barely make the turn, earning a few honks from surrounding cars. In the process, I tailed the black Mercedes for 2 hours before it parked outside a large rundown warehouse situated next to the New York Bay. Ben entered the building through a steel door on the side. Not knowing what else to do, I followed through the same door. Surprisingly, it was unlocked. After closing the door, the mechanical lock voltage itself shot behind me, causing me to jump. I was left in a small corridor that led one way. I followed it into what looked like a makeshift stadium set up inside the warehouse. Seats filled with spectators sat on top of a wall that looked to be about 10 feet. The seats got higher the further back it was. A setup, much like the Colosseum. On a much smaller scale though. There were still thousands of people in the crowd. In the center of it all, held up by a wire attached to the ceiling, was Ben, quietly gesturing to the crowd, getting them fired up for whatever came next. He finally spoke, his voice blasting through the hidden speakers in the warehouse.
"Ladies and gentlemen,"
he began,
"today is a very special day. We have a new competitor, an ex-Navy SEAL, now working as a full-time hired gun. I'm excited to introduce to you Mr. Nicholas Smith."
How this man knew my name and my past was beyond me. But he did. He sounded insane. He sounded like he was far too comfortable and having far too much fun given the situation. He started up again.
"As you all know, there will be 3 challenges, each one more difficult to take down than the last. With our new friend here, I expect it to be quite a show. Send out challenger number 1.
The crowd was on the edge of their seats. In anticipation, I pulled my gun from its holster on my belt. There were 3 large steel doors at the opposite end of the circle from me. The far left door opened to reveal a tall, skinny man. He was covered, head to toe in tattoos. I took aim with my gun as he walked slowly towards me. I shot twice, missing both. My third shot lodged itself in the temple of the man as he fell to the ground, face first, revealing the small throwing knives he had been concealing behind his back. The crowd was silent. Ben looked down at me with a scowl.
"Now, Mr. Smith, understand, I want to fight,"
he said, obviously disappointed. I fired 2 shots up at Ben in anger, missing both of them.
"Oh, I think I heard one go by my ear,"
taunted Ben, getting a few snickers from the crowd.
"Bring on challenger number 2.
The door on the far right was now opened, as a bull of a man came charging full speed out of it. I caught off 3 shots before he closed the distance between us and knocking the gun from my hand. The crowd let out a roar. He was on top of me, letting out a flurry of punches. Through the assault, I managed to see his right eye, a scar running down his face through his blank, milky white eye. It was obvious he couldn't see with it, the iris having been taken long ago by whatever left that scar. Using this to my advantage, I slipped my hand down my belt, grabbing my knife, which was conveniently located on his blind side. He lifted his left arm for another blow, exposing his good eye. In one swift motion, I pulled the knife out and plunged it into his eye. I felt the eye briefly resist before popping under the pressure of the blade. The man staggered back in agony as the crowd let out earth-shattering cheer. He walked back a few more steps before collapsing on the floor, presumably dead. The crowd went nuts. Ben had to shout over them to say the 3rd challenger was being introduced. I walked over, picking up my gun from the floor and yanking the knife out of the dead brute's eye socket. Bloodied and beaten, I stood, with my gun trained on the closed middle door, the hardest challenger. The door slowly opened, and out stepped the small frame of my wife. After processing this, I wedged my weapons between my belt and ran to her sobbing figure. She spoke softly, choking on tears.
"Nick,
She let out a sob.
where am I?"
I was speechless. A hatred like no other grew inside me, all of it directed towards Ben. She couldn't be here, her innocence tainted by my demons. The crowd began to boo. She spoke softly.
"The crowd is growing impatient. Mr. Smith, I suggest you act soon, or I may just have to kill you both,"
Ben said lazily. I decided that, whatever happened, my wife wouldn't pay the ultimate price for my sins. She was going to get out of here. I attempted to say a word of comfort before handing her my gun and saying, "You are going to make it out of this." A look of understanding flashed over her face, actually realizing what I was saying. I knelt down before her, my eyes trained on the ground. The stadium was silent. I heard my wife whisper the words,
"Forgive me."
before a loud bang echoed through the warehouse. My wife crumbled to the floor in front of me as the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Blood leaked from where she shot herself on the side of the head. In an act of unimaginable sorrow, I wept over my dead wife, grabbing the warm gun by her side. I held it to my skull and pulled the trigger, only to be answered by a faint tick from the empty magazine. A moment later, I felt a sharp jab in my neck before my world turned to black. I woke up alone in my apartment. There was a note left on my nightstand. It read, "Congratulations on your success in our competition, Mr. Smith. Due to the overwhelming positive feedback our fans gave your performance, we have decided to let you go. Best of luck in your life ahead. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. But remember, you may leave the shadows for now, but the darkness always finds its way back." If you enjoyed tonight's story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. If you have any suggestions or stories that you want to submit, please let me know in the comments.